Laser engraving on a budget. I've had the NEJE Master laser engraver in my shop for a few days now. I've been testing it out a little bit. I've kind of come up with my opinions on its capabilities and some of the pros and cons of what you can do with this thing, and I thought I'd share that with you. Now this is more from a perspective of scroll saw workers, because obviously that's what we do here at the Scroll Saw Workshop. So I'm going to show you how to maybe add value to your scroll saw projects with this little laser. Let's talk for a minute about the specifications of this little laser. Now there's different types of lasers that you can use to engrave and cut, and the traditional ones that you see in most laser engraving or laser cutting shops are the CO2 type lasers. Those are the ones with the big laser tubes, and they can be very powerful and cut fairly thick material and are considerably faster than this type of laser, which happens to be a diode laser. My laser upstairs that I use for cutting and engraving is a 45 watt laser, and I can easily cut 1/4 inch plywood with that laser. Now this calls itself a 7 watt laser. The true actual output power of this laser is 2.5 watts. So it's just the way they spec it out, but it's actually lower than a 7 watt laser. So obviously the difference between 45 watts and 2.5 watts is pretty considerable. So, you know, this thing is not going to cut thick material. As a matter of fact, this is some 1/8 inch multi-purchase plywood, and that's the most I've been able to get it to cut. And even at that, it takes quite a bit of testing and trial and error to get a decent cut with this in multiple passes, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. So this is primarily designed as a engraver, and it does a good job of that. The downside of it is, it's because the wattage is lower, you have to burn at a slower rate. But now the upside is, because the burn area or the engrave area of this laser is small, you're not going to engrave a large area, so the speed's not quite as big of a problem. This laser engraver is set up to engrave a dimension up to 150 by 150 millimeters, which is approximately 6 inches by 6 inches. And I'll show you that here in a minute also. You notice that when I started the video, I called this the NEJE Master 7000. They have 3 different versions of this little laser. They've got the 3500, the 7000, and the 20 watt lasers. The 3500 is the lowest powered laser of the bunch, and of course the 7000 is what they call the 7 watt laser, and the 20 watt is a considerably more powerful laser, although again they're kind of playing with the specs there a little bit. It's really not a true 20 watts output. You'll see this come branded in a couple of different brands. I think there's actually 3 or 4 different brands out there that I've seen. This one's the K-Moon, and I'll put a link in the description to where I bought this one on Amazon. But they are all rebranded versions of the NEJE Master laser. So that's a little confusing when you're out there looking for them, but they all look identical. They all have the same aluminum extrusion with the acrylic ends, same motor, same everything. So they're all the same product, just rebranded. When you get the product, it comes packaged very well. They've got it encased in a bunch of foam, and there was no shipping damage of any kind, and it would be hard to damage this in shipping the way they package it. So they do a really good job with that. The fit and finish of the laser for the price is really pretty good. When you get this out of the box, you can tell it's not a toy. It's built to do what it says it'll do, and it does do that. I was impressed with the quality. I really wasn't quite expecting that, so that was good to see. It does come as a kit, but that's using the word kind of roughly, because the reality is you just put together the X and Y gantry, which is 4 bolts, and you're ready to go. So really couldn't be simpler to assemble, just a matter of minutes. The more complicated part of the setup is the software. You do have to download the software from the NEJE Master website, and that server was extremely slow. To download the driver and the control software and their version of Inkscape took me about an hour, which would have, on a regular website would have taken 2 minutes. So it was really, really slow. You do have to download the driver, which it is a USB controlled laser, so it needs a USB driver to control it. The software that runs the laser, the control software, is very basic, but it gets the job done. The fact that it's basic is actually good for this laser because you don't need a lot of complication. You just basically need to input the graphics and start the burn and set it up at the right position. So you want it simple, and in this case it is. The last thing you have to do is if you want to design your own graphics to burn onto the wood, you need to use Inkscape. Now the problem is if you already have Inkscape installed, it won't have the extension built into it that outputs the file from Inkscape that will work with the NEJE master. So you have to download their version of Inkscape, which comes with an extension that outputs an NC file, and I'll show you that here in a few minutes, that you can then load into the laser to engrave. So that's by far the biggest problem with the setup, is just the slow speed of their server and having to download their version of Inkscape. I'm not going to set up my screen recording application today out here in the shop, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the software. This is the NEJE software that I've got up on the screen here. Once you get it installed, which was, like I said, after you get it downloaded, the installation is pretty easy. And I believe they have a version for Mac and Windows and Linux, but I didn't look for the Mac or Linux version. This is the PC version. When you first load it up, you've got on the left side of the screen just some information about the state of the laser. You've got the laser temperature, and when you're running G-code or the number of passes that you set, you'll get that information over here on the left side of the screen. On the right side of the screen, you've got these tabs across the top, and the different tabs are for different purposes, obviously. The first tab, which is tutorial, just shows you a quick tutorial on how to assemble the laser, and you can see it's very simple. Just these 4 bolts right here, and you're ready to go. When you go to the next tab called Photo Gallery, they give you a gallery of graphics that you can use to add to your project if you can find something in here you want. So it does come with a library of graphics. The next tab is My Collection, and this is where you'll save your favorite graphics so you can use them over and over again. The control is where you actually start the burning process or the engraving process. So, and we'll use this screen here in a minute more detailed, but I just wanted to show you a quick overview. These are the buttons that you use to line up where your engraving is going to start. This is your start the engrave, the number of passes that we'll make to try to cut or to engrave darker. And then we've got a button down here for the settings. When you load in these graphics from the photo gallery, they're bitmap graphics, and they will scan on the laser in what they call raster mode. So it'll start at the upper left-hand corner, start scanning back and forth until it gets to the bottom of the graphic, turning the laser on and off to burn the wood at that area. You can also send G-code to this machine, which is basically code that takes vector graphics and sends them to the laser, and that scans in a different mode. It actually follows the path of the vectors, and I'll show you that here in a minute too. So when we go over to CNC, up here in the right-hand corner, there's a couple buttons that says Open NC file and Open .dxf file. So these are the actual vector files that you can open from the laser extension in Inkscape that you use, and we'll show you that in a minute. And then over here we've got the online version of the photo gallery for vector graphics. So where the photo gallery has bitmap graphics, these graphics over here on this side are actually vectors that you can play with. And I think you have to be online to be able to access these different galleries. I think if you open it up and your computer's not on the internet, they won't show up. So let's go back to, and just quickly, I want to load in a graphic and show you how it scans on the laser. I'm back over in my photo gallery with the bitmap graphics. I'm just going to select this little graphic right here that looks like a music staff. And once you click on it, it'll open it up and show you a little larger example of what it looks like. You can see that the white area is the engraving area of the laser. And for whatever reason, it never selects the whole graphic. You can see that part of it over here is cut off. To get it to select the whole graphic, you just double click on it. But you can also use that gray box to select just a small portion of the graphic if you only want to engrave part of it. Hit OK. It brings it into where the next screen where we can adjust the width and the height of the size of the graphic. So you can see this is our 150 millimeter engraving area. The graphic is centered here in the middle, and it shows you right here that it's 38.85 millimeters wide. So it's fairly small, which that'll be fine for our little test purposes here. If you click on the adjust width or the adjust height and you adjust either one of them, it keeps the graphic proportional. So when you adjust one, it automatically adjusts the other one. From there we can hit OK. It brings up the next screen, which gives you different settings for how it's going to burn that graphic. So in this case, it's just black and white. So if we go up here, we just get a black and white engraving. Where if we go down to these down here, it gives us different patterns of dots, so we can burn graphics that look more like this little face right here. So if we want to get a grayscale, then we can use these different settings to set the different types of engrave. So I'm going to go up here and select this one right here because that's what we want to use. And now we're back at the screen where we can add text to this if we want. And we do this over here. Not going to do that right now, but anyway, you can add text to this graphic. When we hit OK, it takes us back to the screen where we can actually start our burn. This button will draw a box, which I'm going to show you here in a minute, on the piece of wood that we're going to engrave to show this area right here where it's going to engrave at. This button allows you to move the engrave area. Let's just do that real quick. If I click on this button, the laser over there is moving. Let me zoom back out so you can see that. Okay, so if I click on this drop down box up here and I set it for 10 millimeters per click, which is the largest steps, and I hit these buttons, you can see I can move the laser. So I can position it exactly where I want to position it. The other box, the one that's the bounding box, when I click on it, it actually sits there and draws with the little laser beam exactly where the graphic's going to be placed on the board. So you'll use this almost every time, and then you can move your board around to get the graphic lined up exactly where you want it. When you're ready to engrave, you hit stop, and now we've got the engrave button, the pause, and the stop. The little box right here is to set the number of passes that you want the laser to make. So if you wanted a very deep, dark burn, you can set your passes as high as you want. Down here we've got a settings button that when you click on that, it brings up some very basic settings, slow mode and fast mode, the intensity of the laser and standby. This little dot that you see on the screen right here is actually just a pointer. It's not powerful enough to burn you, as you see if I do that. The laser's not on high enough to actually cause you any trouble. But it shows you exactly where that laser is pointing on the board. We'll get in closer to that in a minute. You can set the intensity of that dot right now, right here. I turn it all the way down. It seems to be easier to focus that way. The sensitivity and motion detection can be set to off, low, medium, or high. If the laser gets bumped during an engraving, it will stop depending on where you have it set. I don't find that useful. I just turn it off and just make sure I don't bump the laser while it's running. So that's what that is. Down below the settings box, we've got the laser power. It goes from 0 up to 100%. You're going to find that the play between the laser power and the burning time, there's a lot of different adjustments you can get there, because you can get from 100 milliseconds all the way down to 0 milliseconds, and then from 1% laser power to 100% laser power. So a combination of all those settings is what you have to play with. And you'll find that to get the type of engraving, or if you're going to try to cut, which I don't recommend, you're going to play with these settings considerably until you get what works best for you. So my suggestion is, when you first get it and you start experimenting, experiment with the different settings, on a little piece of scrap board, and then mark your settings beside those so you can go back and look at them later. So let me set up a board here real quick. Let's see. Now you can see that on this laser, I've attached it to a piece of MDF just to give it more stability. When it's scanning fast, this gantry tends to vibrate a little bit and makes the graphics a little bit rough. So I attached it to this board, which they provide you a couple L brackets to do that. And then I also had the laser draw a box on that board that shows me the area of the engraved area. I'll get in closer to that here in a minute too. The reason for this, these two blocks right here, is the laser has a focal length where it is the most powerful. And to get this 1/8 inch piece of Baltic burst plywood to the exact focal length, I put it up on these blocks, and I did that through trial and error and a couple tests that I ran. You turn this knob right here to adjust the focus of the laser. So when you get the focal length set, which is the height between there and there, then you adjust the focus of the laser to get this point as sharp as possible, and that's where you're ready to cut. So I'm going to zoom in, and when I do, I'm going to be pressing the little bounding box button right here so you can see what it does. Now we're over here with a little closer look at the laser, and I'll get in even closer here in a minute. And hopefully you can see that we've got our little laser dot right here that shows the current position of where the laser would engrave if we started. I'm going back over here to my computer screen, and I'm going to hit that bounding box, and you'll see that the laser starts circling the area where our engraving is going to happen. So we can take and move our board to get the engraving lined up exactly where we want it. So let's say I want to put it up here in the left-hand corner of that board. So right there is where we're lined up. Now I can hit stop, and over here on the right I'm going to set my laser power, and I'm going to set it at about 50%. And I'm going to turn the speed to engrave pretty fast. I'm setting it to about 3 milliseconds. And we'll run it, see what the engraving looks like. As we burn the engrave, we can actually adjust the sliders over here on the fly to get exactly what we want. So now I'm going to hit the Start Engrave button. And let me show you this real quick. With the laser comes these laser safety glasses, and it's a good idea to wear these. Even though the laser is pointing down and not at your eyes, it glows pretty bright, and I wouldn't suggest just sitting there looking at it. You also would not want to have that laser reflect off of any shiny material and back into your eye, or if the thing tipped over or something. So these laser safety glasses are a good idea. I'm going to hit the Engrave button. It's going to circle the area that it's going to engrave, and now it's going to start the engrave. And you can see that what it's doing is it's scanning back and forth in the raster mode of engraving. So it's going to start at the top, it's going to scan back and forth until it gets to the bottom of the graphic. And you can see it's moving along at a pretty good pace right now. This is not bad. Down at 3 milliseconds at 50% power, it looks like we're getting a pretty dark engraving. Actually, it might be a little bit too dark, so we could probably turn the speed up a little bit or the power down a little bit and maybe get a cleaner burn. But you can see this graphic's 38 millimeters wide, and this is how long it's going to take. So you can tell that if you were doing the full 6 inches by 6 inches, you're talking about a fairly long process to get the engraving done, depending on the density of the graphic and, you know, several different factors. But this is just about as fast as it'll go right now. And to be honest, for the type of work we're going to do, where we're going to be engraving, say, the top of a box of a scroll saw pattern, you know, adding some custom text to it or a custom graphic, this is not terrible. It will get the job done. I'm going to stop the video and I'll start it back up when it gets finished, so you don't have to sit here and just watch this. We finished the engraving. Again, this is about a 38mm graphic, and it took about 10 minutes to engrave this, so you can kind of get an idea of the speed. But it did do a nice job, a nice dark engraving. This might actually be a little bit too dark, but it looks pretty good. So as far as engraving, you're not going to set any speed records with it, but it does do a nice job of engraving. Here is a bitmap graphics that I did earlier of a face, and again, I don't have the settings zeroed in for this type of engraving yet. It will do a little better job than this. I just have to prepare the graphic a little better. That's another thing you might want to consider. Your computer skills are going to make a difference, because even though this laser is pretty easy to use, you do need to be able to use Inkscape to do custom type designs. Inkscape is a free vector graphics program. Very powerful, has a lot of one-line support, but there is a learning curve to it. The next thing I want to show you here is the cutting capability of this laser. Now let me say one more time, I don't recommend that you buy this laser with the intention of cutting. It will cut very thin material, it'll cut paper, it'll cut leather, it'll cut this Baltic birch plywood, but you're going to see here in a minute it's pretty touch and go in even cutting this. So I've loaded in a small vector graphic, and we'll touch on vector graphics in 1 minute, but I just want to quickly show you the burn procedure. I'm going to move the laser to the point where it's going to cut. I'm going to take the board and I'm going to put it down to where that cut's going to happen pretty close to the edge, so we can get a good look at it. So you can see that's the size that we're going to try to cut out. Over on the laser control software, I've set the laser power to 90%. And I've set the burn time to as slow as it'll go, which is 100 millimeters per second. Yeah, that's right. And I'm going to set the number of passes at 5, and that may not be enough, but we'll find out. So as you watch this thing start to burn, when it comes here to the front, you're going to see on the edge of this board, see that little orange mark? That's how deep the laser is right now. And you'll see that on the next path, that little orange mark will get down even a little bit farther. And as it comes across the front of the burn here, so every pass it's burning a little bit deeper. And you can see that orange dot, it's almost at the bottom of the board right now. And here comes pass number 3. And at this point we might see some of the dots start to come through onto our bottom wasteboard. See how the laser's shining all the way through? So we're close to cutting all the way through on the 3rd pass. Here comes the 4th pass. And you can see we're getting a little bit more laser going through, but we're not burning the wasteboard yet. So even though the laser is making it through, it's not a clean cut yet. Here comes pass number 5. And again, you can see a fairly solid stream below the board, and we're getting a pretty clean cut. But if you look at down here, you can tell that we haven't cut the back of that box out yet. So at this point, I'm going to set the passes to 1. Now, when I get this thing zeroed in just exactly right, 5 passes will get me all the way through and give me a cut. But you can see the time that it's taking to cut out this small little 7mm square with 5 passes has already been pretty lengthy. So obviously if you had to do 5 passes on this board with a large graphic, you can see you're going to spend quite a bit of time cutting it out. So I'm going to give it another pass here. Again, I'm watching the board below the laser, the waste board, to see if the laser's engraving it. So this is pass number 6. And finally we'll do one more pass, and if we don't make it, we'll just stop there, because you get the idea. To get this thing to cut, everything's got to be just right to cut this Baltic birch plywood. I've tried multi passes on 1/4 inch and you just can't do it. The focal length is not high enough to be able to get through a 1/4 inch piece of multi-burst plywood. Let's see if this is even close to coming out. So you can see there, we probably could have got that out of there on 6 passes, ended up doing 7, but we were able to cut through that multi-burst plywood. The next thing I want to show you is, you saw in the earlier bitmap graphics where it scanned that music logo up there, where it scanned back and forth, and that was a bitmap graphics. This is a vector graphic that we loaded in from Inkscape that I'm going to show you right now, and you'll see a difference in the speed. So I've got it set up to right now where you can see this is a pretty good sized graphic that we're getting ready to burn. It's almost 100 millimeters wide. I'm going to set it on 1 pass. I'm going to set the laser power again at about 50%, and I'll set our burn time down to fairly fast at 3 millimeters per second, and I'm going to hit start. This is what it looks like when you're doing a vector engraving. And it is right about now starting to burn, and you can see what it's doing is it's following the path of the lines, the vector lines that were drawn in the graphic. This is a much faster way to burn graphic. And I'm going to adjust the power up a little bit here as it goes to get a little bit darker burn. But you can see this is a much larger graphic, and there's a little bit of detail to it, so it's going to take a little while, but it's going to burn much quicker than in the raster mode. And I've ended up with the power up about 60%. And obviously you wouldn't want to change it in the middle of a run if you were doing your final image. You want to do all your testing, you know, on test block, and then once you get the power and the speed adjusted just where you want it, then you can go back and burn your final image. But we're burning a little sports car here. Like I said, it's about 100 millimeters wide, and you can see it's moving along at a pretty good pace. So if you were going to design a graphic for the top of a box that you were building or any other project, you can see that this would be the mode you would want to try to design it in for speed. When this thing's running at full speed, when it's not bolted down to this board, this X gantry tends to want to vibrate a little bit because you can see it's free floating out here on this end. So I highly suggest you get some some MDF plywood 3/4 inch and bolt it down. It really stabilizes this quite a bit and gives you a much finer line on the engrave. So there, we did that fairly large graphic, and it looks, you know, pretty good once I got the engraving specs dialed in right. That's not bad. So if you were doing your logo, you know, on a scroll saw project, you could do a pretty good job with it right there. A few more details, and I'll wrap it up here. When I attached the laser engraver to this board, I used wing nuts, and the reason I did that is because you're going to eventually want to take this off and adjust the height of it. So if I were going to keep this, which I'm not, I'm giving it away to somebody. If I were going to keep this, I would actually design side plates right here that had slots in it to where I could adjust the height of the laser up and down. And the reason you would do that is if you wanted to engrave on the top of this mallet right here, you obviously need to get the laser up higher than this mallet. So as long as you can get the board underneath the laser and get the focus set, you can engrave on it. So if I wanted to engrave on this handle, I would just lift the laser up by either putting blocks under it or, again, like I said, have an adjustable wall on each side. So you can engrave on basically anything. That's really handy about this laser. You don't have to worry about your Z direction because you just set it by positioning the laser at that height. So I did use wing nuts so I can easily take these out and take the laser off if I need to. Another thing that's kind of interesting about this is the power cord has no switch on it, and there's no switch on the laser itself. So when you plug it in, it powers on. There is a website that sells an inline connector, inline switch for this power cord, which would be pretty handy, and I think I would probably pick one of those up if I were going to keep this laser. So that is pretty much what I wanted to show you with this laser. This is not really a recommendation, it's more just of a review so you can see, you know, what its capabilities are. I got to tell you though, with only having it for a week, and I don't know what the durability of it is, this thing is impressive. I mean, it did a very fine detailed engraving right there, and it did it in a reasonably fast time. Obviously the engrave area is limited, but for our scroll saw projects I don't think that's a big deal. I think this is enough room to be able to do the type of engraving we want to do. You might occasionally have a box that, you know, with a lid or something that you wanted to do a larger area, but for the most part I think this would cover it. The price of this laser is $230 for the 7-watt version. Now again, I keep saying 7 watt because that's what they call it. Understand it's really not a true, that's the input wattage. The actual output optical power of this laser is 2.5 watts. But there are 3 versions of that, and again I'll put a link to this version down in the description below. And when you go to the Amazon page that has this one on it, it'll show you the option for the 20 watt and the 3.5 watt options also. If you knew absolutely for sure that you're only going to do the engraving, you could probably go with the smallest one. To be honest, I don't think I would. I think I would go with at least a 7 watt just so you have more power, which gives you more speed. Power equals speed in this case. So I think I would go with the $230 one. For what little bit you save on the smaller laser, it's not worth it. The 20 watt laser, I might pick one of those up just to test it. It'd be interesting, even though I know it's not a true 20 watt laser. I would like to see its capabilities. One hesitation I have is in the forums I'm reading, the 20 watt lasers tend to burn out a little faster. So I'm not sure about the quality of that 20 watt diode laser. I can't tell you what the life expectancy of this laser is, but all lasers eventually burn out. So at some point this is going to burn out. I saw this laser online, the 7 watt version, the replacement for, it was well under $100. I think it was $60 for the replacement for it. So if you got a year or two out of it, I would say you would be pretty good. I just can't tell you at this point what its expectancy is going to be. What else? If anything were to come out of adjustment or to break on this, it's so simply designed that it would be easy to troubleshoot and repair. So, you know, basically you just have to make sure that the wheels are snug but not binding on the 2 gantries, and that the motors are turning. You really only have the control board, the laser, and the 2 stepper motors is all you have as far as parts. So not much to it. Let's see what else. I think that, again, I think that's probably most of what I can tell you about it. I like the crazy thing. I'm going to give it to my son-in-law because I've got my big laser upstairs and don't really need it, and he likes to tinker too, so I'm going to give it to him and let him play with it a little bit. But in all, I think it's a pretty good product for the price. It gives you the ability to engrave on your scroll saw projects at a fairly high quality. I'm Steve Good. Thanks for being here with me at the Scroll Saw Workshop. Catch you next time.